Hello, hello, hello. Thank you, Alan. We've just had a wonderful montage of pictures of Nigel coming up on the screen there. Don't we all look young? A lot of memories there. A lot of the memories here on the platform, actually, and we'll hear a bit later about Nigel and what he's done here. But thank you all for joining us to celebrate Nigel's life. Nigel was a much-loved husband to Christine, son to Lorna and Wilf, and brother to David, Christopher, and myself. Most of you know me, I'm Andy or Andrew. As well as being Nigel's brother, I'm also on the leadership team here. At Bethany, I've taken many a service, but I've not taken one quite like this, so hopefully bear with me. He was also a stepdad, a brother-in-law, an uncle, a cousin, a nephew, a friend, and a member of this church who has stood where I am standing now many, many times before, often in a costume. And today we come in thanksgiving for his life. We've had the service of commendation taken so well by Tim at the crematorium. And many of you have been an important part of Nigel's life, and so many people have come together to make today come together, really. And I thank all of you for that on behalf of the family. And while we'd much rather Nigel was here with us, we give thanks for him. And as Christians, we know and we have the comfort of where he is. We take reassurance from the faith that he had in Jesus as his Lord. And we're just going to bow our heads just for a few brief moments as opening prayers. Lord and Heavenly Father, we don't ask for the timing of Nigel leaving us, and we're sorry that he's not with us now, and there's a sadness that comes with that. It's natural, and we know that you are with us in our mourning. Lord, I pray that within that we will see thanksgiving and be here today to be thankful for the life that Nigel had, the way he touched each of us, the way we've been able to interact with him, and the love he's shown for family and friends. He hasn't been a well man in recent years, Lord, but we thank you that we know now, as Tim said earlier, that he is in a better position. We're sorry that he's not here with us now, Lord, but he is now free from the many things which have troubled him in recent years, Lord. But we pray for you to be with us as we mourn, and we pray for the memory of the good things and the good times that we shared with Nigel. We ask this in your name. Amen. Okay. If you'd like to open your books, we're going to have an opening hymn of The King of Love, My Shepherd Is. And if you'd like to stand for that, if you're able.
Please be seated.
A few people during the service are going to contribute from the platform parts about Nigel and remembrance of Nigel. But lots of people contributed to those, and also it's been nice for me to hear so many happy memories of Nigel as we've gone. It will take a lot of bravery for people to come up on the stage when they do. And I'm going to begin by asking one of my brothers, David, is going to come and bring a reading which is linked to the hymn we've just sang.
My reading is from Psalm chapter 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Now we're going to have the first of our parts on memories of Nigel. So some of you may feature in some of this, and some of you may know some of these stories. But I find whenever you attend a funeral, people you think you know very, very well, you find other aspects of their life and other things that they've been involved in. As I say, lots of people have contributed to this, but some of them are particularly my memories and ones I've shared with brothers over the last few days, in particular with my parents. So Nigel Terence, was born on 27th February 1967. My mum has particularly fond memories of him as a young boy in some difficult years. He went to Prenton Primary School just up the road and around the corner from here. When he was 8, I came along to change his life as an only child. Followed 2 years later by David, suddenly found that his time as an only child had been shattered. We happily took to crushing his Sputio players and other small toys, much to our annoyance when we inherited them when he passed them on when we were a little older. By now, he had already named one of his grandmother's Nana Toby, which we adopted knowing no different. It was some years later when I discovered that Toby was in fact the dog, and we knew my nan after the dog's name. Nigel no doubt found that funny. Christopher came along 3 years later, and by then we had a full house. He was a teenager with 3 young brothers and no Sabutio figures. By now, Nigel had moved on from Prenton Primary to Prenton Junior School and on to Birkenhead School, passing on a scholarship and later advancing a year in school. When I went to school at Prenton Primary School, I wore Nigel's old school blazer and cap. Although as the uniform had changed some years earlier, I definitely stood out. I was allowed to stop wearing the cap at the end of the first term, but I continued wearing the blazer for most of the first year. I was the only child in the school who did. I'm sure Nigel found that funny as well. Viewing as a child, Nigel always seemed to be popular, charismatic, always involved in things, and with good and many friends. He was a sportsman, which is hard to believe in his later years, but you can say that about any of us. Playing rugby and tennis at school and breaking his nose playing rugby. He was in the school play, which is the ambitious performance at Birkenhead School of Dr. Faustus. Nothing too simple for them. But typical for Nigel, he could not have a small part in the background. He played the devil, which he decided, I suspect, off his own back to play entirely in leather. Part borrowed from his cousin, and we only resolved this at the crematorium just then, that it was his cousin John rather than his brother Roy. So part borrowed from his cousin John, and part especially bought when times were tight and with great effort by my parents from a shop in Liverpool. and were worn a lot afterwards. We think he borrowed John's jacket and he bought the trousers, or was it the other? He borrowed the trousers and the jacket he wore a lot afterwards. Playing the devil was ironic for a good Sunday school boy who came here with his family from a young child. He came to faith here and was baptized in our pool just below here, which will be lifted up probably after this service as we have a baptism on Sunday. Faith in Bethany played an important part in his life, and he kept coming back here even though sometimes he drifted away. He played football as a teenager for the church, which was always a big thing at Bethany. We had football all of the time, even a Boxing Day football match. There were football tournaments. And in the teenage age group, they went as far as London for the national finals, and they went down there and they won in a team that included Tranmere's current manager, Nigel Atkins. My mother had to plead with Birkenhead School for him to be allowed to go. They weren't a footballing school, and much to my amusement as a child, Nigel had to go in on a Saturday morning for sports lessons. My mum managed to persuade them, and he was allowed to go for the finals. As a teenager, he had a band that practiced in our living room. And of course, Nigel couldn't be one of the players. He had to be the lead singer. Past experience was not an issue. His love of music was with him all of his life, and he was always trying to enthuse us with one band or another. What was his most recent, Luke? Recent band. He was Iggy Pop back onto. So George Harrison before that. At one stage, the Pixies, it moved on. There was a different band that we all had to know everything about every few weeks. The other band was passé, and we move on. He had a great love for films as well, and he continued his love of films and music all the way through his life, but he happily put the singing away, bar here at Bethany. He had other talents. Some older brothers might occasionally read bedtime stories to much younger siblings. Nigel used to make them up for us from scratch, and he'd come in sometimes in the evening to extend the story, and we'd be waiting for the next night, myself and David, and he made up a character called Schnoozy for it. No idea where it came from, but the story flowed every single night, waiting for him to come in, tell the next story. Another time he entered a poetry competition for a coffee shop chain, not the kind of masculine thing that you tend to think of as a sportsman, as somebody who wants to be the lead singer in a band. One entry was allowed per person. He entered 3. He used his own name, and just for laughs, he entered in the name of me and David as well. He won prizes for all 3. It is remarkable that we didn't have the Wirral Globe visiting, and me suggesting that age 9 I'd written this poem. By the time I was 10, Nigel was off to Sheffield University to study law, something I later did as well. And after an extended stay in Sheffield, he moved to London, becoming a barrister for a time. Possibly there was a picture with him with the wig on, was there? So you saw before. It seems a long forgotten time now, but he was a barrister for a time. And while in Sheffield, he made friends with a band. But again, he couldn't enthuse any of us about this band, and he used to talk about the Pulp and Jervis. And when I started university in Sheffield, that band was arguably the biggest in the country. And they had chart-topping hits, best-selling albums, and they were headlining Glastonbury. Suddenly I was interested. So for a long time he moved in their circles. He moved with circles with Pulp and other bands like Blur, and he knew artists like Damien Hirst. And he had the photos to prove it, because otherwise he could tell a tall tale. And he took me as an extra to one of the Pulp members' weddings, where there he introduced me casually to Gordon Banks, the World Cup winner of all people. He had a talent and a knack of meeting famous people. He couldn't just go into Oxton without meeting Elvis Costello or someone along those lines. Eventually, he left London and life as a barrister and returned here, which meant that my parents had all 4 sons living locally, when at one time I think there was probably only one of us here. Nigel worked in solicitors' firms, and his flair and sense for the unusual came to the fore, even in the smallest of firms. He could join a 2-man band, and before you know it, he'd started off a new practice. He particularly started a 1-man practice in mental health and human rights law, taking 2 cases to the Court of Appeal, and at one time instructing Cherry Blair QC at the height of the Labour government, and he was taken for a conference in Downing Street to discuss his case. So he certainly had a talent and a knack of bumping into the famous. Although he had a love-hate relationship with the law, much preferring the arts, music, painting, and in fact most other things, he definitely had his highs in his legal career. But for us as a family, two of the biggest joys were his return to Bethany, where he did many things over many years, and you've seen some pictures at the start, and you'll hear them mentioned later. And then also meeting Christine, and she's been a part of our family ever since. One of the pictures you've seen is of his wedding. He looked a handsome man there, didn't he? Much like most of his brothers. He also looked a lot smarter than we saw him a lot of the time. He really could scrub up, and that was Nigel, that he could change his appearance, he could fit in with different scenes, and he could do that. It was a wonderful day at that wedding. Christine looked beautiful as well, and we had a great day. I had the honor of being his best man on that day as well, so although it is a harder task, it seems quite fitting to be able to take his funeral. There are not many people who can be so involved and have the family involved in a funeral that they can have such a personal send-off and people involved who know them so well. But that is what Nigel had, and he was much loved here. There have been good times, and there have been some tricky times, not many greater than his time in intensive care 3 months ago. That came out of the blue, and we thought we were going to lose him there. There were 2 days when he was in a coma, but at the end of that, he wrote on a board and he said that me and David had been there, and he'd heard what we were saying, so there's a lesson for you if you're ever in that situation. Happily enough, we said nice things. But although we didn't expect what happened in recent weeks, we thought he'd recovered, he was out, he made a nuisance of himself at one last family birthday. But it meant that we had the opportunity to rally around him, and while he was in the hospital bed, people told him, and he knew that people loved him. Often when people die out of the blue, they don't have that opportunity, but just a couple of months earlier, we'd had that. It brought us all together as a family to talk to each other. We all have busy lives, and we don't often see that, but also to be together and to say that to Nigel as well. Not many brothers would have the opportunity to say it to their brothers as well, and also Luke, who played a big part in all of that time. And it was wonderful to see family, friends, and the church rally around him, and he knew that he was uplifted in prayer. And everyone here is a testament to the affection that was held for him. He wasn't always the easiest, but he had some great highs. And when he was well, he was great with people. And he did great things here at Bethany. And I know lots of people can't be here today who would love to be here. Welcome to those who are watching live on YouTube and also the recording later. Really, we just hope that you feel as much a part of our service as those who are able to be with us today. Okay, we're going to stand now for those who are able for our next hymn, which is Blessed Assurance, which speaks of the assurance that those who have faith have.
Salvation,
a childhood and friend into Nigel's adulthood, Alison will be coming up. We were just reminiscing before that Alison's father was known to many of you, Peter, and he actually took my nan's funeral as well. So it's wonderful that Alison's able to contribute here today. And I remembered as well that once she was a babysitter for us as well. So there we go. That ages all of us. So I'd like to invite Alison up to come and share her memories of Nigel.
I'm actually quite nervous, would you believe? Anyway, thanks to our mums, who were good friends right from when we were young. Nigel and I have been good friends ever since. He's always been there, and we might not have seen loads of each other, but whenever we have bumped into each other or he's texted me, I've texted him, it was like yesterday, and carry on where we left off. So I feel really honoured to be able to be asked, really, to share a few memories of Nigel. I've got quite a few, but I'll try and be quick. So, when we were very young, I used to love it when Mum would say, I'm going to Auntie Lorna's this afternoon. I was like, oh, great. Nigel's got loads of boys' toys. So we'd go around, and Nigel and I think Lynn's as well, we'd go in the conservatory area at the back, get all his toys out and all his action men, dress them all up and have hours of fun. Even now, when I see Action Man, I think of Nige. He's even lent recently, well, I say recently, it's probably in the last 20 or 30 years, he lent his Action Man to a friend of mine for an art project, but we won't go there. Right. So, when we were at Prenton Primary and Prenton Junior, Nige I always used to look out for him in the playground. Where's that? Oh, there he is. He's either playing marbles or conkers, and he was quite a champ. And if ever I needed to know where he was, just look for the crowd, because there he'd be. One of the most mortifying experiences of my life was when I was young, I used to love reading. And I'd come in from school and go, right, I'm having an early night tonight, I'm going to bed with my book. And I'd be sitting up in bed reading my book, and I'd hear the front doorbell, ignore it. And the next minute I'd hear on the bedroom door, and then I bought Nigel, and I would be so mortified that I was sat in bed reading, and here's Nigel sat on the end. Anyway, I soon got over it. I don't think it bothered him, but it certainly bothered me. We'd chat for hours and hours. Again, when we were young, we used to go to Bethany Poulton down the motorway, because our mums and dads went there as well. And we were always last there because Dad, it was like 25 or 6, come on, down the motorway. And Nige and Auntie Lorna would be there at the back, that side there. And we'd get there and we'd sit on the back, this side here, and we'd be waving and pulling faces at Nige, and he was always very, very good, well behaved. And then after the meeting had finished, we'd all go outside and play chase on Balfour Road. It wasn't a very long road, we'd run up and down, and it had a wall outside the chapel on both sides, and we'd play tick and jumping on and off, which was the good old days, really, the good old days. Anyway, I don't know whether you remember the Way for Wirral tent at the Oval. Well, my proudest moment was one night, they used to have the service, and then at the end of the service, they'd say, we're going to play some music now, and if anybody here would like to accept Jesus as their Lord and Saviour, stand up during this hymn, and they play that, just as I am without one plea, that hymn. Sitting there like that. And then there's Nige standing up, and I was like, oh, my word. And I think that had quite a profound effect on me, as well as Nige, and it's probably one of my proudest moments, really, of him. And then, CYC, we've all done it. But when we were very little, we were too young to go to camp. So they used to have family camp, which was always the first week in June, and it always rained. Most of the time. I remember my dad on the beach under his sun lounger, sheltering from the rain. Anyway, other night, me and our Lyns, we youngsters were packed off to bed while the adults went into Robbie Hall for their whatever they did. Anyway, we just got all nice and cosy in bed, in our bunks, and in those chalets, and then Lynn's would go, there's a spider up there, there's a spider. And I'm like, oh, and then she go, and there's someone coming under the door. So I go, oh, get dressed. I go, knock on Nigel's chalet door. Nigel, can you come and rescue us from the spider? Yeah, there's a minute. And he get out of bed, come around. And we did that loads and loads of times, and he never complained once. I mean, he might have complained to his mum and dad, but he never complained to me and Lynn's. Then, as we grew up, we moved here to Bethany Prenton. And we had a really good youth group going, didn't we, Alan? Because you're Jill and Rich and everyone, we used to have a real good time. And of a bank holiday, the young people would all get together and we'd go out, we'd go for a walk, or we'd just go out somewhere. But in the evening, we'd carry on, get together. Anyway, one night we were at Hazel's. It was probably back in 1983 or something like that. Hazel just lived up the road here. And when we arrived, a few of us, we went in the lounge, and there's these two strange ladies that we've never met before sat on the sofa. I was like, oh, right. But on closer inspection, it was Nigel and Richard. Jill, good old Jill, she'd been there with the makeup and had the lipstick perfect, makeup, beads, handbags, and they just sat there pan-faced on the sofa with their hands like that over the handbags. That was hilarious. I think I've got a photo somewhere. Sheffield, I spoke about him going to Sheffield, and we used to write to each other and used to look forward to his letters. He wrote to me whether he was feeling exceptionally mad, exceptionally happy, or even when he was feeling a bit low. Even his low letters made me chuckle. He always made me laugh. You know, when I think of Nige now, we're laughing, you know. And even like when we were in the South Chapel before and they were playing I'm a Passenger, I thought, yeah, there he is. He'd be looking down, doing a little jig to it. I thought, and smiling. That was Nige. He was, well, to me, whenever I met him, he was always smiling. We visited him in Sheffield. He took us to see the sights. We went to the snooker place. I can't remember what it's called, but you know what I mean, the Crucible. And we went to the strangest, weirdest wedding I've ever been to was at Sheffield at his church. And we even went to a meeting there once, which was totally different to what I'm used to. Then, sadly, as Andrew mentioned before about his nan, it was the day of his nan's funeral, and I was there with Mum and Dad. And I remember seeing the cars arrived, and all the young men got out. There was quite a few, all dressed up in their suits, all smart. And then Nige caught my eye and he went, "We're the Men in Black." I think it was not long or around that time when the film had just come out, and that's what they looked like. I think some even had sunglasses on, so that was good. What was I going to say? Always, when I go downtown, scan the crowd outside Costa, because he was always there with his coffee, either on his own, with a client, or waiting for Christine. Back in the day when Marks and Spencer's was Christine's just in Marks and Spencer's, so just having a coffee. And we'd have a little chat and that, and again, he'd have a funny story to tell. He probably told you the one about the Panto tickets. That was I think this year, because it was just after Christmas, and he's sitting outside. We're having a chat, and he goes, "Oh, we've got this WhatsApp group at work, and they're taking them all to the Panto tickets." And he goes, "Can you believe they put it on the WhatsApp? Has anybody seen the Panto tickets?" So I couldn't help myself, could I? Behind you, I wrote. He goes, "I don't think many of them saw the funny side of it," but he did, and I did, because it was just him. He was a good, loyal friend, and he was always there if I needed him. Could drop him a text, likewise him, me. And particularly when I lost Mum and Dad not too long ago, he was like, "Is your dad all right?" When Mum went, "Is your dad all right? Can I go and see him? Has he got support? We're praying for him. I've told Bethany. We've got them both on the list." He was just amazing. And I would like to think of myself being that support to you, because he offered your support to me as well, Chris. So that's pretty much it. I love Nige very much. He was my oldest friend. I've known him since we were babies. And I look forward to seeing him again. And it's great to know that we've got that reassurance that we are going to see him again. And for now, our memories are precious and no one can take them away from us. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Christine's now going to come and share her memories of Nigel with us.
Dear Nigel, I met Nigel about 18 years ago when he came to the Citizens Advice Bureau as a volunteer. He was getting back into doing representation, and somebody suggested that Citizens Advice Bureau would be a place. I was working there at the time. My first real memory was we were at a staff meeting in one of these arranged bonding sessions that they have at these places of work, and it was a quiz, and the manager was asking the questions, and this person who was lodged just by the side of me, looking very bored, and was jotting things down on a piece of paper, suddenly looked up, and it was a question on sport, and it was a question on football, and to cut a long story short, he didn't agree with the answer that had been given, and he was quite right, but I thought that's quite interesting. I quite like that, and it did make people laugh that he questioned something. So we worked side by side for a while, and as the time went by, we got to chat, spent time having coffees together, and sharing the details of the work we were doing. As time went on, years went on, we really did realise that we shared the same sense of humour. Although we were very, very different, where we did meet, we were so alike. We had a sort of a naughty sense of humour, and we liked the same music. We had interest in many, many things. And one day we went to a barbecue, and from one of the volunteers, and we started to talk, and we realised that we really did feel a lot for each other. So time goes on, and it would have been our 14th wedding anniversary, October the 30th. So we had, as Andrew said, a beautiful wedding. It really was. And he often talked about it afterwards as being a wonderful day. He did look very handsome. And yeah, it's a cherished memory. Nigel, also while at the Citizens Advice Bureau, one day we were talking, as we do in groups at coffee times, about different interests, and many people were sharing about animals, and Nigel said, well, he wasn't really into keeping a pet. And I'd always had a pet, and I was quite interested in having a cat. And Nigel said out of the blue, well, if you can get 2 black cats, males, must be identical, yes, we'll have them. Well, funnily enough, the next day, somebody came in, and they said we were looking for homes for 2 tiny little black kittens, and Nigel fell in love with them. And we called them Ronnie and Reggie, and Ronnie was Nigel's. And he loved that cat. Absolutely loved him. And sadly, Ronnie had to be put to sleep And the night before, Ronnie was in pain, and Nigel actually curled up with him. I do remember that. So Nigel supported me through lots of my ups and downs in my life, and I tried to support him as well. One time he suggested that why don't we go to Blackpool for a weekend? I said, okay. I hadn't been to Blackpool for a very long time. So we went off. It was freezing cold. We went off on a train. We went to some guest house that looked as though it was out of the 1950s, you know, where they have a cruet on the table. And it was at the time when mobile phones were still quite heavy and brick-like. And I can remember saying, as we were looking out over towards the pier, I can remember, I said, I better charge my phone. And he said, yeah, here we are, plug it in here. And he was looking out the window, I can remember at the time, and as I plugged my phone in, all the lights of Blackpool Illuminations went out. A coincidence. But Nigel managed to convince me that it was my phone that had caused it. So, Nigel, I think as Andrew said, had things that he was very keen on. Films, Tarantino, Kill Bill, The Dark Knight, things like that. Not my sort of film, but we went along to see some. The one that we both went to see together, I can remember, and we both looked at each other during it. It was Macbeth, and it was a fantastic rendition of it at the cinema. And we both looked at each other when we get out, and we'd both been crying at the same part. It was very emotional in one part. And that was one film that we did see eye to eye on. Music, David Bowie, the Pixies, Lou Reed, the Killers. Nigel was quite impressed, the fact that I had actually been to a David Bowie concert and during the Siggy days, and you know, he was very, very impressed with that. So in later years, Nigel had come to love George Harrison music, and whilst in hospital, he had managed to get one of the nurses to find a screen where he could play some of the George Harrison music, and while my guitar gently weeps, and he loved that song, and he also loved Prince's rendition of that as well, because he liked the star to be a star. He liked rock and roll to be rock and roll. He didn't like any mamby-pamby. He wanted it to be in your face, and that's how he wanted it to be. Art was very important to Nigel. Nigel expressed himself with his acrylic paint and a lot of brushes, a lot of sprays, a lot of everything in one room. And would often get up in the early hours to do some creative work. And sometimes coming down in the morning, one would find some amazing pieces of paint. Often on the floor, and bits of furniture sprayed as well. And actually, I've got Nigel's watch here, which has got some paint from one of his last paintings that he did, which he decided to put a little bit of edging of the avocado green on, which I think we've got in various places in the house, but it's on his watch there. It's not by chance, I believe, that Nigel and I came together. I believe that we supported each other and found a way of getting through things together at difficult times. Nigel I knew always carried some sadness with him. He was very funny, but as with a lot of funny people and artistic people, there is something very deep within them that comes out through their performances, whether it's on paper, music, whatever. And I think that was with Nigel. I love Nigel, still love him very much. And I know he loved me. A few weeks before he died, Nigel actually came into one of the sitting rooms at the front of the house, because he had a separate room that he did his work in, and he smoked in. And so we'd mix between the rooms, and I'd have another room. And he came in his dressing gown, as he often had walking around the house. He'd have his dressing gown on, perhaps with a paintbrush in his hand or what have you. And he sat down on the sofa in front of me, and I kind of thought, oh. He said, you know, I was thinking what a wonderful woman you are. And how much I love you. And it just came out of the blue. And I said, I know you love me, and I love you. And that was it, really. And then he just wandered off again and started to make the coffee. But that was Nigel. And with Nigel, I gained something wonderful in my life, and I gained a wonderful family. Nigel's Lorna and Will and his brothers, sister-in-laws, the beautiful, what are they to me? They're my nieces, nephews, nieces, yes, I have to think of that. Beautiful, beautiful family, and the family here at Bethany. And I'm very thankful for that. And I thank you all for being part of his life and for being here today. And Nigel always had to have quotes. And on one of Nigel's cards that he gave to Luke, my son, he always had to quote something. It was always full of quotes. And on the back of this one, he'd got a quote that he'd written, I think it was one of the last cards to you, wasn't it? And he'd written on this one, on Luke's card. And it's a quote. I think you'd perhaps be able to guess what it's from. It's this. I don't want to die without any scars. Only after disaster can we be resurrected. It's only after you've lost everything that you're free to do anything. Nothing is static. Everything is evolving. Everything is falling apart. And that was Tyler Durden from the Fight Club. And the amount of times that Nigel would do quotes from that, and that was Nigel, and I'm thankful for him.
We'll now stand to sing a further hymn, which is When Peace Like a River, otherwise known as It Is Well With My Soul. If you can stand if you're able. you've never looked into the background of that hymn, I suggest that you take it away and you just Google and you hear the story behind it. Now, Alan is going to come and share some memories and also a message. Alan was a good friend of Nigel and often was here on the platform with him.
Well, it's a real privilege to be asked to share some memories and to give a thought. I've known Nigel for much the same time as Christine, actually. I think Christine thought I'd known him for many more years. Perhaps he just looked that way. But no, I've only known him since about 2012. And we hit it off pretty quickly. We're both sort of arty. We both liked sort of poetry, reading, art, music, those kinds of things, and found we had mutual interests. Went to breakfast with him at the Brass Balance in Birkenhead, Hamilton Square, and we enjoyed the breakfast. I spent a lot of time listening, and I discovered that perhaps we didn't have quite as much in common as we thought on certain subjects, but we had plenty to turn us into friends. And at church, if you'd come along to what we call the guest services, we hold them once a month. They're slightly different kind of services, more of a magazine format. The idea being that if you're not familiar with church, come in, start with a bacon butty, or maybe have some lunch afterwards, chance to sit around and chat. And we developed what we call the Nigel sketches, well, what I call the Nigel sketches. When I walked up, you probably thought this was my notes for the talk, but I've been hunting through my various pen sticks and computers. I found at least 42, which I seem to remember from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy as the secret to life, the meaning to life. But I think there's quite a few that are missing, including one called the Oscars. So if it ever turns up, I'd like to see the Oscars again. And we used to do them together. And you would see, I mean, you've seen a little of this already, but you would see Nigel in something fairly extravagant. Nigel's great delight was to wear one of the hats that from my sort of dressing up, doing school's work, and he would love to wear this particular one. I think that was his favourite hat. He'd often flounce in with that. On one occasion, we were doing a sketch about shepherds, and Nigel came in with this on. Now, it's seen better days, I appreciate that. It's an old hippie piece. It wasn't mine. I bought it in... I don't know, somewhere in town anyway. But he loved putting that on, and he was coming in as this shepherd. But partway through the sketch, and I brought some sheep out. We always had plenty of very strange little props and things like that, as you'll have seen from it. So I had a whole table full of sheep here, with different names on them and what have you, which I'd used with infants in different things in school. And I said to Nigel, now we're training you up to be a shepherd. And he said, no, I said, I'm not a shepherd. I'm a butcher, he said. I've only turned up for the barbie. He said, I'll have your sheep. We'll have some lamb chops, lamb kebabs, lamb Henry. I said, on your way, you're not getting any of my sheep. But that was Nigel, you know, he'd enjoy a laugh. And later we did actually have a barbecue that day. And he appeared in all kinds of guises in these 42 sketches. I can't remember the different ones. He was King Nigel I. He was a prophet, a patient, Nigel Leslie, Nigel Wilfson, Nigel de Vere. I didn't even know there was a de Vere family, but obviously it had come out somewhere. He was Nigel de Vere, he liked to be known very posh and famous. Nigel the heretic, Nigel the butcher, Nigel the shepherd, and he enjoyed taking part. Now, not only is Nigel known for being involved in different sketches, as it were, in church, but as you've already heard, very much an artist, and one of those you're not getting your hands on, and there's a lot of them out there and a lot in the back there. It's one I bought of Nigel a while ago. I really liked it. I think it was one of his favourites, actually. I saw it on his website, and I said, I'd love to. So I bought that one off him, and I've been looking at it. It looks sort of like a ship to me, and down here there's all kinds of things going on. Up here we can see a talon from a claw, and maybe a lion or a tiger's head. When you turn it that way up, you begin to see that there's some kind of highwayman or somebody at the bottom there. And I began to wonder whether it was a dream that had, it did look like a ship to me. And I only looked on the back of it today, and it actually said, Nigel Leslie, painting 2016, wrecked. And I don't know whether that was a comment about how he was at the time or how he felt about himself, but clearly it was the idea of a ship that was wrecked, and but maybe it was saying something also about his own feelings about life at the time. I'll put that one there. And the thing I would say about Nigel, as so many other people have said, is he had an ability to look closely at things and see them with a fresh perspective. Now, we've had a reading there. David read to us Psalm 23. It's a reading you often hear at people's funerals. It's a reading that resonates, where David is saying, the Lord is my shepherd. And even if you're not a regular at church, you'll probably know David through the story of David and Goliath, the little guy beating the giant. And it's a well-known picture story. But what's less well known is that this is the only son of second marriage. Both the parents have been married before, and he's a genius. All his older brothers and sisters, they're kind of like the hillbilly family. They're clodhoppers. They're all right, but he's born as a genius, the last of the bunch. He's got the poetry of a Shakespeare, the music of a Beethoven or a Mozart, hand and eye coordination of a Joe Root, if you like cricket, the mind of a general like Napoleon. He's got the good looks of a teenage celebrity and the heart of a good man. Now, I'm not saying that's all, that all refers to Nigel, but some of those would do. I don't think he'd fit in anyway as a general like Napoleon. I wouldn't like him moving my armies around. But there is this lad, as a teenager, watching over a flock of sheep in the Judean hills. And the hills are, they're rocky places. There's not a lot of grass. There's a lot of deep defiles, places you could fall off there. And David is a boy, but he grows into a man who sees a bigger picture. Like Nigel, he sees the Creator behind everything. We've spoken about Nigel's faith, haven't we? And there's David looking up at the stars at night and seeing the Creator. And he writes another psalm, Psalm 8, when he says, Lord, O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. When I consider the heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you've put in place, what is mankind, that you even notice us, that you care for us? You've made us a little lower than the angels. And David wrote that. And the more he looked at the sheep and the more he looked at the stars, he thought about the bigger picture. The night hours, the time to get things into perspective. And I think as he looked down at sheep, he saw how dependent they were on the shepherd. Probably he felt large in comparison to the sheep, but small in comparison to the stars. He felt at peace with the night, with the world. Nigel did a lot of work at night time. Often he'd come and do these sketches, and it would be a case of he'd not slept all night, but he'd still faithfully come and do the sketches because that was his work. And as he looked at the sheep and realized that he was responsible for them, he felt a sense of God's care and protection over his life. And it's fair to say that David felt or knew the shepherd's provision. He writes, I shall not want, makes me lie down in green pastures. You only got green grass. In the springtime, shepherd had to go hunting for it. Most of it was rocky. It was a bit like playing cricket on the Pakistan pitch that England had been playing in. It was an awful sort of place for sheep to graze. He leads me beside quiet waters. One of the interesting things about sheep is they can't drink from really fast-flowing water. If they do, it goes up their nose, disorients them, and they'll fall into the stream and drown. So one of the things the shepherd had to do was cut a runnel, had to cut a little sort of an alleyway, if you like, or and the water would flow into it. And once the water was there and it was no longer fast-flowing, the sheep would drink, but he couldn't just find a stream and let the sheep drink from it. And so he's caring for them, the provision. He knew the shepherd's peace, he restores my soul. And though Nigel had struggles in later life, and he'd have been the first to admit that, He could send me long texts at all hours of the day and night, long streamed. He had to get it off his chest. It was like a catharsis, something, and we've heard about that. Once he was interested in a piece of music or a film, he had to share it with you. He was aware of the shepherd's peace deep down. He never sent me a text that says, I'm giving up on God. It's nothing like that. He knew the shepherd's presence, did David, the shepherd. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, or the darkest valley, I'll fear no evil. And Nigel's last months were difficult, very dark and difficult. But he didn't lose faith, or he didn't lose sight of the one who'd been with him in the good times. Christians aren't promised a rose garden. Christians aren't promised that somehow everything in their life will be perfect. It's not like that at all. God goes with us through the difficult times too. He knew the shepherd's protection, your rod and staff, they comfort me. One was to draw the sheep back in, one was to beat off enemies. David knew the shepherd's preparation, a table prepared for him, and like gifts, things that God gave Nigel these wonderful artistic talents, and he was very, very talented. He was cited in the Telegraph as one of the 100 most significant artists of the 21st century. Something to put on your CV, isn't it? Nobody's ever said that about my poetry. He knew the shepherd's promise, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And we've spoken about how Nigel's now at peace. He's left the old body behind. He's gone to be with the Lord. He's at peace with him. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. In the New Testament, we meet Jesus, who says that he's the good shepherd. David was a good shepherd to his sheep, but Jesus said, well, I'm the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and I lay down my life for my sheep. And in life, as we have heard, Jesus became Nigel's shepherd, the one he followed. Sometimes like a woolly-headed sheep, like many of us do, backwards and forwards, not always getting it right, but he followed. He didn't give up. He believed. And the Lord is still his shepherd in death. And I need to leave you with a challenge, because not only would Nigel have been disappointed if I hadn't turned up with a floppy hat and that hippie coat and the little sheep, Nigel would be very disappointed if I didn't say to you and ask you the question, is he your shepherd too? Could you have Nigel's confidence? Tim shared this with us earlier at the Creme. Could you have Nigel's confidence that after this life, you will be with the one who created the stars? That the one who was David's shepherd and later became Nigel's shepherd is your shepherd too? Funerals are time for us to take a fresh look at our lives. Could you say that if you died today, you would go to be with the one who calls himself the Good Shepherd? Nigel had no doubts about that. He knew where he was going. He endured the many struggles of this life, but he knew he was going to be with the one who loved him and cared for him as the Good Shepherd. Yes, Nigel looked at things deeply. He found that there was more to this life than what we see on the surface. He found Jesus. How about you? Will you let David shepherd, Nigel shepherd, be your shepherd too?
Thank you, Alan. We're just going to close our eyes just one moment, and we'll close in prayer. Lord and Heavenly Father, thank you that you brought Nigel to us. We thank you for the many ways in which he touched lots of people here. And we pray that you'll be with the family in the coming days as we mourn. As we said earlier, we didn't choose the time of his going, but we're thankful that we had him and all the things that we did with him. Lord, as we go out now, we just thank you for how you've been with us through this time, and we ask for it in the coming days. Amen. Okay. Thank you all for coming. For those who are able to hang around, and I know Nigel probably would have skipped out about halfway through the service, we'll be hanging out near the sandwiches now. There is a light lunch outside. It'd be great if you're able to stay, and we'll share some more reminiscences. If you're not, please just have a little look at his pictures, which are outside in the foyer on your way out. Thank you all.